author of the Politico Playbook. I'm joined by my colleague and Playbook co-author, Anna Palmer, to host a virtual Playbook interview with New York Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's going to join us in a few minutes to talk about how her district has been hit by the coronavirus, what more needs to be done in terms of economic relief, and what Congress is going to do in the coming weeks and months, and of course, the 2020 election.
Today's briefings are among the virtual events that Politico is hosting in the coming weeks with journalists from across the newsroom. We also wanted to remind you that if you have any questions for Representative Ocasio-Cortez, that you can tweet them with the hashtag #AskPolitico, and we'll try to get to them at the end of our conversation. But before she joins us in a few minutes, Jake, let's just set the stage for where we are today, several weeks into this corona pandemic. You're coming in this conversation from your house in DC. I'm coming from mine. It's obviously a little different than a lot of the live events that we've done, but I think we can kind of break it down from what's happening at the White House, on Capitol Hill, and then just kind of this overarching effort to try to figure out when the U.S. can reopen for business. So why don't you catch us up to speed about the White House right now?
Sure. Welcome to my living room, or my office, so to speak. So a few very important things to think about here. Number one, the White House is in the midst of now today rolling out a council with which the president will decide how, when, by what mechanism to open the economy, and in his estimation, to rev up the economy, which of course was in a good position pre the coronavirus, and the president wants to get it back in a good position, although there's scant evidence they will be able to do so at least in the immediate. So the president's focus and the White House's focus from the top on down is really how to get the economy back to a place where it could open up. I mean, the medical community is looking obviously very intently at a therapy and a vaccine for the coronavirus, but the president's focus, and he's said this time and time again, is how could he open up the government now, or the economy rather. Now, the other important thing, and this is very immediate, and I don't think a lot of people have caught on to this because it is a little bit obtuse, and so let me break it down for you. The program, the centerpiece of the stimulus package that Congress passed just a few weeks ago, was a large fund that would give loans, forgivable loans, to businesses across the country, provided they don't fire their employees. Now, there have been some problems with this program, but by and large, it's been popular because it's free money from the government. So that's generally a popular proposition. Now, the administration, Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, who negotiated this package, the president didn't have much to do with it. Steven Mnuchin did most of everything here. He has said that that fund, the fund that provides the free money to businesses, is going to be empty by the end of this week. That's a very big problem because there are loads of businesses that want this money, that want to be able to keep their businesses open and keep their employees, but they're not going to be able to because this program is going to not have any money to give to financial institutions to lend. Now, it's Wednesday today. That's halfway through the week. This fund is slated to run out on Friday. That is 2 days away. There's no movement that we could sense at this moment to get this pot of money refilled. It has to go through the House and the Senate on what's called unanimous consent. Now, Republicans just want to refill this money with $250 billion of new money. That's what the administration has said. Democrats, on the other hand, want to fill this, have that ride alongside more money for hospitals and state and local governments. So again, these two sides are kind of at a stare down at this moment, or at loggerheads, and we'll have to see where this ends up in the next couple of days. But this could have big impacts. I had a Republican tell me yesterday that thousands of businesses could go bankrupt if this pot of money is not refilled. So really an important thing to keep an eye on. It's something that you and I, Anna, are going to keep an eye on and keep people up to date in Playbook.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the important point on that to really think about is there really hasn't been much movement between the positions where Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has staked out his position, as you described, to just have this money go, and then really where Speaker Nancy Pelosi is. She sent a letter and then statement out last night was very aggressive against the president. And kind of those two sides are really at a loggerhead. And so far, the president has not been in touch with the speaker, which is pretty outstanding. understanding through this entire crisis. It's kind of, in this era where it's hard to be shocked, that is one of the relationships that is so fractured at this point. It is very surprising that they haven't been able to get on the phone or kind of come to any kind of working relationship at this point. I think it's one of the things we talked about at the top of Playbook this morning, which was really this concept of the president, when he came into office, when he came into politics, saying he was uniquely kind of positioned to fight people, but then also bring them back into the fold. And right now he finds himself with very few allies, whether it's in terms of Republicans in Congress or business folks or certainly Democrats, but he's kind of, and in the media, there's even the traditional kind of Republican allies that you would think would be on board with what he was doing, or he would try to kind of bring them onto the fold so that they could help push his policies, really haven't been there. He's kind of a lone wolf right now.
One other thing to keep an eye on is the president's battle with governors across the country. The president believes that he is able to reopen the economy, which there's no evidence for that. It's not what the Constitution indicates. It's not how our system of government works. Governors across the country are going to make decisions because the Constitution says they can, about when they might be able to open up their government. We see across the country on both coasts, on the West Coast and the East Coast, governors banding together to make decisions based on science, Republicans and Democrats, on economic factors, and the president who says he is going to overrule them and is threatening them with withholding federal money and things of that nature. So we're really going to get to a stare down of sorts between the president and governors who have this authority to reopen the government on their schedule, not the president's schedule. A reminder, the president has not shut anything down. The president has issued guidelines and suggestions. So
Jake, I'm going to interrupt you here. We have actually the Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is joining us. So I want to make sure we get to that conversation. Sorry to interrupt you, but first of all, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. You are on the ground in one of the hardest hit neighborhoods in the region on planet Earth. Can you tell us how the coronavirus has impacted your district, Congresswoman in the district in Queens that you represent?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for having me, Anna and Jake. I represent New York's 14th Congressional District. Out of the top 10 most impacted districts and zip codes in America, 5 of them are in New York 14, including the top 3, all in my district. And this, we are truly seeing the impact of this on the Bronx half of the district. Some of those zip codes, they span both boroughs, both the Bronx and Queens. On the Bronx half of the district, we are seeing mortality rates that are 2 times higher than the rest of New York City. In Queens, of course, many of us know the complete, just how ravaged Elmhurst Hospital currently is, how ravaged many of these communities are. And really, I represent working people, which means I represent a lot of frontline workers. I represent a lot of hospital workers, as well as grocery store workers, delivery workers, home health aides, and more. And all of these people are in a profoundly dangerous position. We also know that this crisis is hitting us in the context of racial and income inequality and inequity. And we are seeing that the death toll is reflecting those inequities as well.
The president has said that he's given everything to governors that they need, and has referenced to Andrew Cuomo, who he has said has begged for medical equipment. I want you to react to that, but also, I'm assuming you're talking to frontline medical workers, and are you hearing that they have what they need?
A lot of our frontline workers do not have what they need. We are hearing, different things from hospitals. I think a lot of frontline workers have just been concerned about having adequate supplies, but there are frontline workers like home health aides that simply do not have the PPE that they need. And we're not just talking about the nurses and doctors in ERs and ICUs. We're talking about home health aides that are going from apartment to apartment, from home to home, visiting the elderly and visiting folks with disabilities or other issues. And they don't have N95 masks, and they don't have the ability or the PPE to be able to feel like they are confidently protecting themselves and the patients that they're treating. We're also hearing a lot about the frankly, the mental toll. What we're experiencing in New York is on the scale of 9/11. And it's happening over the course of 2 weeks instead of over the course of several hours. But we know that we are losing thousands of people in New York City. The death toll was revised up by thousands of people because it included, we started to count people who passed away from COVID-like symptoms, but who did not have access to a test. And we're looking at over 10,000 dead. And this is an enormous crisis that we're confronting. And a lot of our frontline workers are already starting to talk about the mental costs. And so what we really need to keep an eye on in the mid and long term is how are we going to provide mental health care support on PTSD and other sorts of things. But really, this is one of the reasons why we're pushing for Pramila Jayapal's bill, which temporarily expands Medicare to cover everyone who essentially needs that coverage. But in terms of Trump's relationship to governors and to Governor Cuomo, on one hand, he can't have his cake and eat it too. You can't refuse to shut down. You can't refuse to recommend shutdowns, refuse to accept any responsibility for this crisis, and then all of a sudden turn around and think that you're going to tell governors what to do after you've abdicated all your responsibility to them. And I think that that's really the bind that he's in. And it's one, if he gave up power, then that's fine. We have to take that mantle of leadership and responsibility.
Could you just assess Andrew Cuomo's performance during this crisis?
I think given this entire crisis, there are things that he just logistically did the best that he can, and things that you have to work out, when it comes to Javits Center turning into a hospital, when it comes to the USS Comfort and negotiating those things, trying to get ventilators, all of these things, I think his team are doing his best. That being said, I do think that there are very real racial and economic inequities into the way that we have responded to this crisis in the state of New York by recommending mortgage moratoriums without recommending rent moratoriums or rent suspensions. We are basically making and exacerbating many of the class issues that the healthcare crisis of COVID-19 has already exacerbated. There are going to be thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands of people in New York City that are not going to make their rent this month. They're not going to make their rent next month, and there is no plan for them. And because there is no plan for them, that means that even those mom and pop landlords will not be able to pay their mortgages. And so I think we need a real plan. I'm proud to be supporting Chairwoman Maxine Waters in our FSC plan for rent and mortgage moratoriums, and making sure that we are demanding recurring payments, not just a one-time $1,200 check, but $2,000 per adult plus $1,000 per child recurring for the time of this crisis. It's not even a left or right thing. It's just what is necessary to keep people, intact.
The CARES Act, by all accounts, did kind of arrest the slide of the economy. You, however, sent a note for the record that you would have opposed it. Can you talk us through why, and do you, despite that, do you think it's been successful, at least on the front, stopping the slide of the economy?
Yes, and I think that this was a tricky bill for every single person, particularly every single Democrat. What we're talking about is just quite literally one of the largest bank bailouts we have ever seen in American history, because it wasn't just the $50 billion that was essentially put in a slush fund. And it had some strings and provisions in it, but it also had a waiver where Mnuchin could essentially say, forget all of the rules, I'm going to decide. And it looks like they are deciding. And so I didn't think that that amount of money, the $500 billion, which was, again, not just $500 billion, being leveraged into $4 trillion or for Wall Street corporations was, I didn't find it acceptable. It was a very bitter pill. And when you look at what we were getting for it, in terms of the SBA funds, in terms of stimulus checks, I felt like it was asymmetrical, and we were giving away far more than we were getting for working families. That being said, this administration, I don't think that's on Democratic leadership. I think we know that we're between a rock and a hard place, and Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell absolutely refused to help working families. It was like pulling teeth just to get them to expand unemployment assistance for people in America. They didn't want to do it. And so while I opposed the bill because I felt like there was just a great amount of harm being done, and I was uncomfortable with just unanimous support for it. I also acknowledge that many of my colleagues voting for it, made a completely understandable vote as well.
All three of us kind of are around the same age and have now lived through, this is our second major once in a lifetime financial calamity. And I only laugh because it's not once in a lifetime for any of us. And I just kind of wonder if you could reflect on that a little bit. And what does Congress need to do both in the short term, and you mentioned in the immediate term, the rent moratorium and mortgage moratorium, things like that. But I mean, I wonder if you could project forward a little bit for this generation. We kind of unfortunately had the lessons of our generation in the 2008, 2009, 2010 period. But now it looks like we could be going through something even more significant. And I wonder what Congress should be doing kind of in a longer term sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right, Jake. Millennials have been just completely screwed by our circumstances and the events that happened in our lifetime. And it's also important to note when these events are happening in our lifetime. And when in the 2008 recession, we graduated into that. Millennials graduated and the recession hit just as we were starting our careers. And one of the things that you really see economically is that your starting wage at the beginning of your career has a very long-term trajectory. It's kind of like an anchor. And people feel this in their everyday lives when they apply for a new job and they say, one of the first questions is, what was your last salary? Well, when you graduate into a recession, you're kind of permanently anchored by that low salary. You take that compounded by the fact that real wages for working people have not raised significantly in 30 to 40 years. So even, the fact that our parents may have been making something similar than what we are making now does not help. And then when you have this is happening when a lot of millennials are now just climbing out of that recession, just getting to formative parts in their careers. They're just hitting, many of them, their early 30s. And these are usually the moments in our economy when we think that people are going to buy a home or start a family. And we know that millennials are delaying these major steps for financial reasons. And so moving forward, I don't, personally, I don't support a progressive agenda just to score points or because I consider myself a leftist. I support a progressive agenda because I think it's the right thing to do. I think that the right thing to do for our country moving forward is to guarantee healthcare, pay people a living wage, support labor rights, and make sure that we're doing that with a lens of racial and social justice. And so if we don't pursue solutions that are on the scale of these crises, we already know what the consequences of that are. We see it right here with COVID-19. There are a lot of leaders that did not want to respond with the swiftness and the scale that a pandemic required, and thousands of people are dead because of it. And when it comes to the future for millennials, if we don't make swift, bold policy moves, then we are talking about millions of people in this country being condemned to a precarious form of living, precarious housing status, precarious medical care for the rest of their adult lives.
And do you even have a thought at this point about what the dollar figure is that Congress will need to spend before this is over?
A lot of people have asked me what implications that this has for climate change. And when it comes to the dollar figure, I think for both of these issues, I don't think that there's a figure that we can look at right now that is too much.
Right.
I don't think a lot of people understand the scale of the impact of this. This is not even a slow moving recession or relatively slow moving like we saw in 2008, where it started, where kind of the inequities and the cracks started at the top, and it eventually kind of manifested in crashes in housing prices, or rather in a meltdown of our housing market, and eventual unemployment and all of these things. We're talking about the entire economy essentially seizing up overnight and doing so on a global scale. And we, as policymakers, have never, ever entertained anything on this scale before. And I think that we're going to have to either make the New Deal look normal or even small compared to what we have to pursue moving forward.
This is all happening, obviously, with the backdrop of 2020, the election. It's been a big week for Joe Biden. He secured Bernie Sanders' endorsement. Former President Barack Obama endorsed him yesterday. Right now, right before we got on to have this conversation, Elizabeth Warren endorsed him. You told the New York Times the other day that you still hadn't heard from Biden's campaign. Is there any update there?
Yeah, our teams are in touch.
Do you expect to endorse him?
Yeah, I think we'll see. We're having conversations with Biden's team and trying to figure out what some of these policy conversations were looking like. You know, I would love to see the vice president clarify and deepen his policy stances on certain issues. But aside from that, you know, I think it's incredibly important that we support the Democratic nominee in November. Yeah,
Bernie Sanders said it would be irresponsible to not support Biden, which it sounds like you are. If you're not there, you're certainly getting toward that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do think, listen, at the end of the day, one of these two people are going to be president. It's either going to be Donald Trump or Joe Biden that will be elected president in November. And we have to live in the reality of those choices. And I know that there may be a lot of folks that are uncomfortable with that, but as a person that represents an intensely vulnerable community, a community where this choice can very much mean the difference between life and death, or you know, being separated from their children or not. I think it's for me personally very important to be in solidarity with with the families that I represent in supporting Joe Biden in November.
Do you anticipate being an active surrogate for Biden?
You know, again, I think as I mentioned in that conversation with the New York Times, a lot of that is up to our conversations that we have, and frankly, the role that the Biden campaign wants. You know, it's not necessarily up to me entirely either.
Yeah.
I want to ask you. You said there might be some policies that you particularly want to maybe have him shift on or massage his positions. Can you give us one or two examples where you really want to see some shift and you think maybe the folks that are in your camp are looking for Biden to make some movement on?
Sure. Well, you know, I think I maybe don't have two, I maybe have four, but I think there are very real, tangible areas where Democrats even fell short, perhaps during the Obama administration, that I think I would like to have for us to have a plan to improve, particularly when it comes to Puerto Rico, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to healthcare for Americans. I don't think lowering to 60 is going to be enough for us. And I think that we're going to have to pursue a much more ambitious healthcare policy and climate change. I don't think that the vice president has a climate change policy that is sufficient right now. And I'd like to see us really work on that.
Do you have any thoughts about who should be his running mate?
I do not.
Come on, everyone has thoughts about who should be.
I know, like everyone speculates, you know, and while I'm encouraged that Biden has said that he, you know, wants a woman of color to be his vice president, for me, what's really important is not only just that woman's identity in terms of gender and cultural terms, but I think what's very important is who that woman is and her stances. And there's just there's so many, you know, while there aren't enough women of color in the Senate or in politics, I would argue in general, there is a wide spectrum politically of women of color. There are some that are very conservative in terms of Democratic context, and there's some that are more progressive. And so, you know, I would hope that Biden's choice kind of signals that kind of branch where, you know, Barack Obama, I think he selected Joe Biden because they came even from different places politically as well, not just in terms of identity, but Biden was more conservative than Obama at that time. And I think it would be encouraging if Biden also picked someone who is a little bit more progressive, that he knows may push him.
Just want to follow up on that quickly. I mean, we've seen kind of candidates stumble around with this new reality technologically with this campaign. I mean, how concerned are you about the campaign's ability or inability, or everybody's inability to actually reach out and campaign during this paralyzing time?
Well, you know, it's a very, this is a very real concern, especially when it comes to congressional elections. There's still a lot of states, including New York, that have primaries coming up. And so this has implications for all of us across the board, from down ballot candidates all the way up to the presidency. I think the number one thing that is most important for us in every state in this country, and then just nationally, is to guarantee mail-in voting, and to make sure that we standardize that to compensate for the challenges in campaigning this year. And even states like New York, which are seen as kind of blue states, the declaration of just waiving the excuse on absentee voting is completely insufficient, I think, for the challenges that are ahead of us. And, you know, in New York, absentee ballots are not counted the same way that mail-in ballots are in other states. They aren't counted. They tend to be unsealed when an election is very close. And I think what we really need to do is take a step above and beyond that, mail every single person, every single you know, eligible voter in this country a ballot. That is what has to be done. And that's the only way that I think we can really compensate for the fact that we're not going to be having people going out and registering others and knocking doors in the scale that we already would have been at this point this year.
Let's shift to your race a little bit. You do have a primary. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce recently backed your challenger, Maria Caruso Cabrera. This seems to be something that might actually benefit you. Can you react?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, hey, you know, there's a lot of conservative and Republican interest. There's a lot of Wall Street interest in unseating a visible member that holds Wall Street accountable. And, you know, I take it as a badge of honor. I think it shows that we've been very effective in our first term. And if people want to put a lot of resources into this race, that means it's because we pose a very real threat to a lot of the lobbyists and corporate interests that are used to having kind of free reign in Washington. And so, you know, sometimes you're defined by your friends, and sometimes you're defined by the people who try to come after you. So I don't take it personally.
Do you now? We have just a few minutes left, so I want to get to a couple, at least one audience question, and then one final one from us. I mean, Dreamers, DACA. You talked about how this pandemic is affecting minority communities especially hard. I'm curious how you think it's affecting Dreamers, who the president has said he would like a deal on, but has not been willing to get one done for a long time.
You know, I think it's affecting Dreamers. It's affecting mixed status families, this pandemic a lot, even just in terms of rolling out of aid. There's been some tangles with mixed status families, especially children, and, you know, even more adult children of undocumented people in this country. And so this issue's been impacting mixed status families a lot. I do think that a lot of Dreamers are sick of being used as a bargaining chip or a political football. This idea that we're going to, you know, provide some small relief for Dreamers while deporting their parents, you know, all of these things. These are very fraught, emotional, issues as well. And I think, this is why we have to have a larger conversation about immigration and the contributions of undocumented people in this country in general. We have ITIN payers, people who pay, a lot of people don't know that undocumented people pay taxes, and they pay billions of dollars of taxes, and they pay income taxes through using something known as a kind of a taxpayer, an alternative taxpayer ID instead of your Social Security, an ITIN. And we're talking about people that are paying their taxes through ITIN that are also receiving no economic relief while they fund a lot of public programs that the rest of us enjoy. And I think, we are seeing the public health consequences of that, because the #1 most impacted zip code is Corona, Queens, which I represent. And this is a heavily immigrant community where people are going outside, they are stocking our groceries, they are serving people food because they have not been included in economic support. They are terrified of being evicted or removed from their homes. And it has rippling public health consequences when we don't create the economic policies that allow people to stay indoors to help us contain this virus.
We have one more question, and then we'll let you go because we know you have a heart out here. Anna, do you want to take it away?
Yes, sure, I'm happy to. So yeah, I think the last question is just also a little bit on your election. Have you thought much about a primary challenge to Chuck Schumer? And is that's in the back of your mind a little bit?
It's in the front of a lot of other people's minds. So I'm curious on that.
No. Right now, my concern is just making sure that I'm taking care of everything that's right in front of me, and just, making sure that I earn the honor and the privilege of serving New York 14's congressional district for another term. I mean, as you mentioned, while I am honored that that there are well-heeled and well-funded organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Congress kind of coming in opposition, I also don't underestimate the millions of dollars invested interest in unseating me. And so I'm very much focused on my election in 2020. And honestly, this news cycle is so insane. Who knows where any of us are going to be in 2022?
I hear you.
Would you rule it out?
I literally don't even think about this in any serious way. So like, I don't know.
All right, we'll let you leave it there. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. And thank you all of you for joining us on the live stream for this virtual briefing. It's been great to spend time with you. We look forward to them in the coming weeks and months.
If you enjoyed this,